In the future, Kylo Ren may become the most powerful dark side user ever. But before Kylo Ren, the supposed prophecy spoke of who would bring balance to the Force, and that is, of course, Anakin Skywalker, also known as Darth Vader. But one of the questions that people have asked time and time again is, if Anakin had never lost his limbs and become crippled and been burnt to a crisp, would he have been more powerful as Darth Vader? Did him becoming more machine than man make him weaker than he actually would have become? Let's talk about it on this video. And joining me is a very well-known theorist, at least in the Dragon Ball community, and he's going to step into the Star Wars realm with me today. Please welcome Qaaman's Land.
Alrighty, guys, it is Qaaman here today.
All right, Quinn, bro. All right, let's go. Let's become Quinn for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's talk about this. So, in Revenge of the Sith, Obi Wan fights Anakin, cuts off his legs and one of his arms. He gets burnt to a crisp, becomes Darth Vader. The theory is that Anakin was supposed to be the most powerful Force user in the galaxy. Now, I don't believe, in my opinion, that the movies really captured this. And I'm talking about all 6 movies. We never really saw Anakin as being so incredibly powerful to where he could go beyond Yoda and beyond Emperor Palpatine. I just never saw that. However, if you go into the expanded universe, whether you go by the old or the new books, we see Vader doing some crazy stuff like destroying ships and, destroying entire fleets by himself. But that never happened in the movie. So the question is, do you think that the fight with Obi Wan affected Anakin to where he never really reached his full potential?
Well, yes, and even if you, and I'm using both like movie, video game, and expanded universe canon to support this, because if let's start off with like the video game universe. I know it's not canon, but do you remember the game that basically came out? It was that one where like Star Killer. What was that one called again?
The Force Unleashed.
The Force Unleashed, right. In that video game franchise, basically they were heavily implying that Vader was somewhat slowed down, even though he was able to train him, that Vader's powers were somewhat hindered because he's this big metallic body. He can't move the same way. And think about it. If you have metallic legs, you can't move the same way. You can't be as mobile. So in my opinion, Danny, when I think of whether or not it hindered him for future use, I definitely think it slowed down his potential, but I don't think it stopped what he could ultimately become. And I think it mostly factors into the lightsaber clashes, because let's say me and you are having a lightsaber clash and I have metallic legs versus I am basically able to just use my organic parts. That's also taking something in. And I also remember reading, even though, I know you're not the biggest fan of the prequels, with the whole midichlorian concept, that by losing limbs, he's basically losing some of the cells that made up that very, very powerful, in-depth, midichlorian cells that made Anakin Skywalker who he was. So even looking at it like that, if he was hindered, I think he still surpassed what he would have been originally. And here's the perfect analogy we could use with Dragon Ball for those of you who might be familiar. It's basically like using Future Gohan. I think Future Gohan's a really good example, because it's like saying Future Gohan without, going into the hyperbolic time chamber or room of spirit and time, and Future Gohan losing an arm. Future Gohan would never live up to what he originally would have been. But that's not to say if Future Gohan trains for 30 years, he wouldn't be stronger than what Gohan was 30 years ago, but he just couldn't live up to the potential because of what held him back. And I think that analogy could be used to equate this whole Anakin Darth Vader argument.
Now, there's another side of the spectrum I want to analyze here, and that is, of course, what Yoda said in The Empire Strikes Back. And to me, The Empire Strikes Back, the movie, I feel is until Force Awakens, because I think they're pretty much tied now, I think that they really expand on the lore of the Force better than any of the other 5 films, or 6 films, or, well, it'd be 5 if it's those 2. But, because Yoda says in the movie, he's lecturing Luke, and he says, luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. And he's like, you must feel the Force around you. And he talks about, the muscles. He points at Luke's muscles, and he's like, not this crude matter. And he's like, size, look at me, look upon me. I'm not the size you really matter. And of course, the whole argument is that even though Vader was not a man anymore, his ability to use the Force, his power of the Force, should not have gone down based on what Yoda said. It actually should have gotten even more powerful as the older he got, because as you know, Yoda also was pretty old and he was more powerful as well. So the theory, right, is not just that, that he did get stronger with the Force, not with lightsaber duels, because that's requiring more so the body than the mind, even though it does require the mind as well. But also the other theory is that one of the reasons why Anakin / Vader got weaker was because of the heartbreak of losing his wife. And that's one theory I had heard, that when Padme died and when his whole life came crashing down, he it's not that he lost the will to live. He was still a driven man, but his motivation to become the greatest Jedi kind of dissipated. Plus also the fact that there were no other Jedi left. So he was
Yeah,
kind of the default best one.
yeah. I mean, outside of Obi Wan and
Well, he
Yoda,
didn't
but
know Obi-Wan was alive. Yeah.
exactly. So theoretically, he really. I mean, if you go by expanded universe, they'll always throw in those like extra Jedi, kind of like how Dragon Ball throws in. Oh, by the way, guess what, Danny? We have like some random sayings that nobody's ever heard of. But Broly. But the thing I was gonna say though is that when you look at it like that, Danny, I agree with you 100% on the notion that he did get stronger because of the Force and he was more powerful over time. But I just think of, because of his injury and having to adapt, I think that it may have slowed down his potential. And, obviously, if you look at Luke and, if you look at Luke in comparison to Darth Vader, it was kind of insane how strong Luke got in such a short period of time. And
Yeah.
obviously the
Yeah.
prequels, the prequels were discussing how Mace Windu was telling Anakin that he was too old to start training, but ironically Lucas was like more than twice Anakin's age when he started training, and look how strong he got so fast. Which is what tells me that I think that because of their natural affinity with the Force, whether or not you say Luke has more affinity or less than Anakin, I think you can make the argument that because of Anakin's natural potential, I think that he should have been stronger than what he ultimately was, considering his son, who may have equal or less potential than he does, can catch up to him in such a short period of time. And I think you can base some of that on the will of Vader, because obviously Vader didn't want to hurt his son, but at the
That's
same time,
right.
his son didn't want to hurt him. Or you could just base that off of, their ability. And I think the whole dark side versus the light side also comes into play too.
One last question. If you go back and you play the Star Wars Revenge of the Sith PS2 game, one of the coolest things about that game is that it has a what if ending. And I know you love what ifs, but
Yep.
no, right? But if you play that game, there is an option to actually, if you play as Anakin, you
You
can.
kill Obi Wan.
Yes, you kill Obi-Wan, and then it gives you an alternate ending where you actually kill Emperor
Sidious.
Palpatine. Yeah, and Sidious, and you become the Emperor of the Galaxy. Do you believe, in your opinion, that it's a realistic option? Do you think that if Anakin won that fight, and obviously if he had won the fight, he wouldn't have been all chopped up. Do you think that had he won the fight, that he would have turned on Palpatine much sooner and ruled the galaxy?
That's a very good point. I think it's definitely possible. And I think to support your claim even more with more evidence, Danny, you can use the fact that when Palpatine was fighting against Yoda,
He says
I
it.
remember Palpatine specifically says Skywalker will become more powerful than either of us, which is definitely making a statement that Anakin was definitely weaker than both of them. And obviously, you can make an argument that Obi-Wan was stronger than Anakin at that point, too, even though it kind of doesn't make sense because of the whole Count Dooku thing. But, anyways,
Yeah.
the point I'm trying to come across is if he's saying that Anakin will eventually become stronger than either of us prior to Anakin getting injured, that's saying that he definitely feels that Anakin would ultimately eclipse them based off of the path and projection that he was going to go through. But Obi-Wan basically stilted his growth. I think another perfect analogy I just used to close this out, Danny, is this: if you look at like an athlete, like let's say a Derrick Rose, and Derrick Rose won an MVP really early in his career,
And
but
then he
he had
got
an
hurt.
right, he got an ACL injury and he's never been able to be the same. And that's not saying that Derrick Rose can't go back to being as great as he was or even greater, but the path that he was on to be in the NBA was much higher than it was. And I think that's a perfect analogy we could use for Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, and the thing about the new movies now is that we have Kylo Ren turning completely to the dark side. He was injured by Rey, but not completely crippled, and there's a good chance that he might be able to realize his full potential because he's in their bloodline as well. But that remains to be seen in the Star Wars sequels. Let's go ahead and take it to the comment section like we always do because we do love to hear from you. I really like talking about this stuff with people on the internet and people who are subs. Of course, check out Qaaman's Land. The link will be in the description below if you haven't. Lots of theories and good stuff, and possibly some more material on his channel coming soon that will expand his horizons. But I want to know from the people, do you think that had Anakin not had his limbs cut off, would he have become a more powerful Sith Lord or a more powerful enemy? And I'm going to answer it by saying this. I feel that yes, had Obi Wan lost that fight, Anakin would have probably gone back to find Padme, and there's a chance that if he woke her up, there may have been a chance, and this is kind of pushing it, that she may not have died right then and there. I'm not saying she wouldn't have died, but she may not have died right then and there, and maybe the whole timeline would have changed, and maybe Anakin would have turned on the Emperor, and then who knows what would have happened. But nonetheless, give us your thoughts below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you down the road.